Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. Hello, Ben. How are you?
G'day, mate. How are we?
Oh, I'm pretty good, thanks, mate. Excited Q&A day today, so there's a fair bit for us to get through. But before we do, Ben, although the footy has been a little bit, we're missing it of late, there's a big event coming up that you want to chat about that is important to remind folks, isn't it?
Yes, Bryce. Traditionally, we have the big rivalry between Melbourne and the Collingwood Football Club, and that is obviously the opportunity where it's the big freeze. And obviously, with COVID-19 this year, the big freeze hasn't been able to happen, Bryce. So what we've got is a story where, you know, we won't have that event, but I can let you know that Steele Sidebottom, our vice captain, is going to go down the ice ramp into the ice bath, and obviously all of the money raised from the big freeze goes to fighting MND, which is motor neuron disease, which is a crippling disease. It's a shocking way for people to go, and there's no cure. So in terms of that, yes, we just want to let everyone know. We'll put in the show notes the link to the donation page. We've got our beanies, Bryce, so I'm sure we'll be taking some photos with our beanies on and sharing them around. But if you haven't already bought your beanie, start of winter, get out there and buy a beanie and support this very important cause. So that is, if you go to the show notes, but if you all just want to straight forward to it, you just go Big Freeze 6 and that'll take you, Google that and it'll take you to the donation page. So that's a big news story, Bryce. I just wanted to share that one because it's a really important
it's
event.
very important, and it could get a little bit lost in everything that's going on. So I'm glad that you highlighted it, which is very good. So it's terrible to see what's happening to Neil Danaher there. So all right, well, mate, a couple of things before we launch into our session today. One, thanks to the property professor last week. We had a really great session. So we got some really good feedback about that. So we're glad to have him return back onto the show. And we're also very close now, Ben, to doing our launch. You talked about the Queen's birthday. We're actually launching our course on the Queen's birthday. We're actually doing it over a short period of time, Ben, so that we can actually concentrate on helping any of the students that come on in that period of time. So we're opening and closing registration for that starting on Monday. So as we've been doing each week, Ben, we've been doing some reading out some reviews, which has been encouraging for us. Last week we talked about some of the not so good ones, Ben, so for you and I to lift our game. But today, Andy Lee did a very, very creative one. I thought we can't go without reading this one out, Ben. It's the name of the review is Ultimate Property Team, and it's Ben, Bryce and the Stig. And just for the record, we have Emma as well, but in this case, Ben, Bryce and the Stig make up the Ultimate Property Team. Ben is like, and this will probably drive me nuts that he's done this to you, but Ben is like Scott Pendlebury, ultra smooth and calm under pressure, has an ability to cut through the noise and simplify any situation. But when he gets on a roll, he will accumulate many possessions and share some terrific insights in gold. That's you, Ben. Bryce is like Matthew Pavlich. I'm happy with that so far. Ultra reliable and consistent, provides terrific leadership and structure and keep the team on the right path, but has great experience and attributes to provide endless property knowledge goals. The Stig, Ben, is like Peggy O'Neill, of course, the president of the Richmond Football Club. So the Stig is like Peggy O'Neill, working tirelessly and silently in the background, keeping the organisation ticking whilst keeping everyone on the path. Forever humble and gracious. However, here's the important point, Ben. However, all true fans know she is the key component to this successful team, and you and I will have no problem with agreeing with that. Correct. And then it goes on to say, Ben, all footy banter aside, if you want a podcast that will improve your knowledge of the property industry and take you on a journey of self-improvement, money management guidance and personal development, then this is the place to be. So what are you waiting for? Roll the sleeves up and join the team. As Pendles would say, knowledge is empowering, Ben, but only if you act on it. I've been wanting to say that for a while.
Wow, how cool is that?
That was cool. It's creative. Well done.
Yeah, no, very creative, and obviously being, compared to Mr. Silk himself, Mr. Scott Pendlebury, it's not relevant. Scotty is elite.
You'd be impressed with those guns,
I'm a pretender, but he's a machine. So that's very nice to be put into that sort of category of people. The same with, obviously Pavlich. I saw him take the pies apart once at the MCG. The guy was a phenomenal footballer as well.
Scott Pendlebury has got Fremantle-like qualities. That's probably why he's such a champion.
I'm not sure Scott would agree with that statement. But anyway, we'll move on.
Let's move on for the non-football followers of our podcast.
Thanks very much for that great bit of feedback. He's obviously got to get a free course. Oh.
Andy, right in. We'll hook you up with the course. We appreciate that. And just to let you know, we'll be reading out a couple next week, Ben, because that's during our launch period, and then we'll be done. So, and there's some really great ones here. So thanks for that. Hey, Q&A day today, Ben. Before we get there, I want to say this statement to you, and then I want to ask you a question without notice, right?
Sure.
Storms draw something out of us that calm seas don't, and that was by Bill Hybels. So something that happens in the storm, we often don't have in calm seas. So my question without notice: what did you learn about yourself during the storm of COVID? That you didn't realise that you had in yourself, that the calm seas wouldn't have highlighted about you personally, and then I'll do mine.
Well, it is a question without notice. I'm probably less emotional when it comes, and less fearful of this sort of stuff. So I think what I've sort of learnt over 30 years of investing and doing the things that I do, that nothing sort of surprises me or phases me to a really high level or a low level. I sort of just get on with it, and try and find context in things. I mean, you look, when the pandemic was first coming out, there was, once we knew that it was airborne and you could get it through droplets. That started then say this thing's going to be a material thing, and it turned out to be a pandemic. So, and then obviously mortality rates, that was concerning. I mean, if we had a similar mortality rate to the sort of SARS and so forth, where it's sort of in that sort of 10 to 15, 20% range, that's significant, right? And that would have been, not that it's any less significant for those people who've been affected. It's not, but it is severe. It is deadly. But again, I probably just come back to what I know and the fact that predominantly most people are more optimistic than pessimistic most of the time, and that's how you've got to live your life. And if you're a cynic or blaming others or doing all that type of stuff, you'll never get anywhere. So that's probably, the one thing that I reinforced about what I do.
Yeah, I like it. And to be honest, Ben, I would say to our listeners that you are very calm and measured all the time. I obviously spend a lot of time with you, and but you don't necessarily get to pressure test that when the seas are calm, do you? You don't know that that's
correct.
It's only when the storm comes that you realise that that's how you remained, and I can say to everyone who hasn't seen behind the scenes that you remained that the whole way through. So that's good for you to know. Mine was similar, knowing that not similar, but a similar theme. In that. I knew that financial transformation stacks up all the time, right? So people who are in some form of agitated pain around their financial situation want to improve it and get to a place where they feel some form towards pleasure instead of away from pain. So I know that stacks up when there's calm seas, but it's been really interesting and encouraging to note that through a pandemic, people still have agitated pain around not being able to manage their money, and they still have agitated desire to actually solve that pain. And so whether or not the market is going to, according to the front page of the newspaper, hell in a handbasket, people still want to steadily move through a cycle and realise that financial transformation isn't going to happen over the life of some pandemic. It's going to happen over a lifetime, and it's going to happen over multiple cycles, and it's going to happen over multiple decades. And therefore, it's been encouraging to see our clients in our own, we've got our own, Brad in our team's bought a property, Matt in our team's bought a property. There's people who have walked their talk, as well as, you and I being the voice of that. So it's been encouraging to see that, okay, financial transformation doesn't care about what all the noise is that's surrounding it. The fundamentals remain irrespective of that, and that's been nice to reflect on. So, good one. I did give you a question without notice, so well done on playing at home there, Ben. Storms draw something out of us that calm seas don't. That was a quote by Bill Hybel. So my invitation to our podcast community, Ben, is just have a little reflect on that. What did you experience through the coronavirus that you didn't realise was a strength of yours, or a real quality of yours prior to COVID that sort of highlighted? And maybe if you want to let us know, we'd love to hear.
All right, Ben, Q&A day today, which is pretty exciting for us. We love to get the questions from our community. But before we go there, I just wanted to read out one that we received via email. And it was back at the beginning of April, Ben. And I think it was probably a pretty good reflection. It was one of our listeners. So we'll just say his name's Ryan. And he sent out this message. And I thought it might be beneficial for people to hear it, because they might have also been feeling a bit the same way at the time, and then sort of talk about how we addressed it, and maybe give it a little bit of commentary. And here we are sort of at the end or the beginning of June now, just to see what it looks like. But here it goes, Ben. Hi guys, love the podcast. Can't take the seller's agent out of the buyer's agent. Hey, you're good. Keep talking up the market, you'll need to. Nothing to see here, business as usual, just like what all the agents out there are telling me. I've already tested the market with bogus offers and had 2 accepted at $150,000 and $200,000 lower than the guides on the northern beaches. This was unheard of 4 weeks ago. The global economy is in freefall. Every country's government is printing money like never before in human history. America is in trillions of dollars of debt. We'll all be in billions of dollars of deficit, and you're saying the property market locally won't suffer much? Come on, guys, that's not fair. You guys and your realestate.com and domain guests have a conflict of interest here. Why don't you get an economist on that doesn't? One that will tell us straight with no vested interest. This will affect the market in a way we've never seen before. This will ultimately affect your primary business, so it's in both your best interest to talk up the market, as you've no doubt a wide audience, and you hope, like all the agencies, word will spread and this won't get too bad. Expected better from you guys. And your friends over at an alternative podcast are doing the same thing. Your seller's agent at heart, used car salesman in disguise. I tell you what, there will be a lot of cheap Mercedes and Porsches for sale soon, causing agents won't have jobs, and we might just see them dressing like normal people and driving more modest vehicles at opens now. Great, bring the pretenders back down to earth, I say. Market was out of control. Hopefully this all brings it back to where it should be. Ben, so I guess fair enough. Ryan's entitled to his opinion, and clearly, and I've addressed that too, Ben, in terms of, when I've talked to Nerida, I said, look, one of the criticisms that we get, Ben, is that we're in the property game, we have a property business, so, how do we overcome the fact that everyone thinks that there's a vested interest in us for talking up the property market? But I think what we've tried to do over a period of time is be really clear on why we think that's the case, rather than just have some form of hollow statement that can't really be based in fact. And, I guess, from the supply side, we know that construction measured by completions and new approvals is down. We also know that listings in terms of private sales and auctions are down. And on the demand side, we know that most of the indicators that, household size, population growth, and your ability to actually buy as affected by interest rates being as low as they've been, and the fact that with one caveat that household income is clearly affected for those people that have been badly affected by COVID. But in general, we've tried to back it up with solid facts and get people to form objective views. And I guess the reason we wanted to read that out is because clearly we're now 8 weeks down the track from when that particular listener wrote into us, and hopefully some of the fear and the anxiety has actually left the market to see that some normality has returned, and we now are in a situation where, using the Oz Property Alive hashtag that you kicked off a couple of weeks ago, we can see that people are out in the market and people are buying. So it's interesting to see where we are just some 8-9 weeks down the track, Ben, from that.
Yeah, Bryce, I mean, there's no doubt we have a bias towards property. I mean, it's what we do. It's how we help people create, their financial freedoms. But we also have, I suppose, a level of subject matter expertise that some might call used car salesman. We'd like to call it, basically, experience in what we do. And the other thing that I think it's lost on a lot of people, even the broader economists who are out there, is it is a different beast, the residential property market, than most other investment vehicles. It does have some very fascinating variables that don't exist in other marketplaces. And so I use the example, and we've talked about this before, but 70% of the marketplace is actually owned by owner-occupiers, right? And of those, around 50 to 60% of those people own their properties outright. We also know it's underpinned by land. So different to a business that's listed on the stock exchange, whereby businesses can fail and they can be worth only the sale of their liquid parts, and that can usually be obviously the fixtures and fittings and the like, which are normally fire saled. The underlying land, and that's why you've always heard that McDonald's and the churches are also very, very wealthy, because most of their churches are in the best locations, the highest points and land. And so I think there's a couple of elements there, and we were going through a very, very fearful period, and you saw we'd never seen a correction like it on the stock market before because of exactly that. And one of the things, coming back to the points that make it a different type of market, is you own a fraction, a 15th of a company when you're buying shares. And we were talking about it before, but the share market is basically a popularity contest in terms of how it moves and how people vote. And because you're not a big player in the grand scheme of things, you can see a lot of fear selling and panic selling, and that really is quite amazing because it's a liquid market and it's very easy to get out of stocks. What's different about property market is we only need competitive tension against two potential buyers, because the reality is that if you win, you are the outright owner, and if you lose, you've got to fight another day. Yep. Now the human psychology, and this is why I'm more focused on behavioural economics than I am about the numbers of unemployed and what happens there. And make no mistake, I've also publicly said that if I was holding high-rise investment stock rather than investment-grade assets and those types of things in our city centres, I am definitely going to be feeling the pinch, and I'm going to be in probably red territory on a lot of fronts. I'm going to struggle to find a tenant, and I'm also potentially going to see devaluation of my asset as potentially more of those people buy these types of assets. And we've been saying this all along. The vast majority of people buy these investment stock assets and they will underperform. We have been a little podcast on the side that's grown into a movement, and people are listening to us because what we say makes sense. I mean, it's logical in regards to if you can buy a piece of terra firma in Australia that's got amenity, goods and services close by, infrastructure, job opportunities, then there's a high probability that land will appreciate over time, given its scarcity and given demand and supply drivers of greater population growth and all those types of things. So we haven't, deviated from that point. Yes, are there risks in the system? Well, in some areas, there might be risk of people who have overgeared themselves, and again, those people of holding those assets, but that won't have a material impact on the property market, because the reality is over the course of the next couple of months, you will start to see programs that will assist those people. So you'll see extension type programs that will come into play around lending, because the banks don't want to see the market fail. No one wants to see the residential market fail. And in fact, the economy is only a product of the activity of people in that marketplace. And the government knows, the Reserve Bank knows, all the economic commentators know that the wealth effect is it's an economic behavioural measure, and it's real. So if people continue to stop spending and if we have prolonged unemployment, then the reality is, and when we say prolonged high unemployment greater than 10%, then we will see property prices fall greater than 10% over maybe the next 2 or 3 year periods. But our prognosis and our thesis was that when unemployment comes off its peak in June and potentially into July, when unemployment's going down, property prices usually start going up. And if they sit around that 7 to 8% range, then you normally don't see double-digit price growth falls. And that was the diagnosis that we had in terms of the marketplace. Sure, we've still got challenges around immigration. We heard the Prime Minister at his press conference 2 weeks ago talk about the fact that immigration is still going to be challenged. I still put that measure out there to say it doesn't have to be. If we can bring international students in, we should be able to also measure very clearly about how we can potentially bring immigration in. And you've heard me argue my point around for every immigrant that comes into the country, we are creating significant job opportunities for people. So it's not taking jobs, it's about making jobs. So I think from that point of view, that was the proposition I was putting forward. But like in any of these types of times, you are going to see people put an alternative argument forward and potentially a reaction that they're having to the time, and maybe, you know, in their own circumstances, their financial position was challenged. And for those people, again, we express our sympathies around, and we hope a speedy recovery in terms of getting back up there. And we know this has all been led by a health crisis. So you've seen consumer confidence spring back. We've seen a lot of things spring back, and we've come back to a calmer place, Bryce. And I think that's the message that we were trying to convey there. And we haven't got our calls right all the time. But if you go back over our legacy of podcasts, we've made a lot of good calls, more right calls than wrong calls, and we're starting to think this is the right call, even though there's a lot of people saying you just wait to September and October when all of this incentive and stimulus drops out. And it's like, I'm not quite sure you're going to see it drop out as you think it's going to play out. And I'm again basing my thesis that I expect property prices to be back to flat, if not slightly positive growth in the last quarter of this year, based on that. But again, if I was talking about the unit market, and I was talking about the CBD locations where there's high clusters of units, those markets aren't going to be in black territory. They'll be in red territory for sure.
Yeah, so I think the reason we wanted to read that out was to clearly we protected. We didn't say the listener's last name, but it was just really to say, well, this was a heightened sense of what was going on at the time, and it was us trying to maintain our leadership position of saying, all right, well, this is what's happening, but this is how we see it based on the evidence that's presented to us. And look, we don't pretend that we know absolutely everything, Ben. What we do say is we give an honest account of what we do know based on what we've done for collectively between you and I over 40 years. And then I guess when you accumulate the resources of the brains trust that we have at our disposal within the 4 pillars that we talk about as needing to master, you know, in terms of the buyer's agency team across the country, our mortgage broking team that's doing, you know, we're in the top 25 brokers in the country. So we're doing lots of loans across lots of different lenders. We're the pioneer in terms of building out cash flow management plans, and we also got a very good handle on what the defence strategies need to look like. So all we're saying is based on those, our own personal property investing experiences plus our professional experiences with what we're doing, we felt like that was the call to make. But look, we made some wrong calls. We called the top of the Sydney market too early based on the affordability in late 2014, and prices did continue to grow in 2015 and beyond. So there was an opportunity. Now some of that came back, but clearly in 15 and beyond there was an opportunity to still get a bit more of that equity. So we put our hand up for that. And on the back of that Sydney call, we called that pivoting to Melbourne and Brisbane is better at the time, right? So we got Melbourne right, but we didn't get Brisbane right. So again, we're prepared to say that we're, you know, certainly not flawless, but we've got a lot right because we talked about prices rising over those early couple of years of falling interest rates. We knew that the APRA intervention would create winter was coming. We did that a fair bit. We also talked about off the plan and house and land packages having greater risks around that negative results, and that flowed in. We also, you in particular, Ben, around the Labor's negative gearing policy was factually incorrect and misleading and played a leading role in that. And so clearly there's a few things that we got right. We've also got some stuff wrong, but I guess upon reflection, I think the call for calm at the time was the right call, because I think the market some 8-9 weeks has shown that the sky didn't fall in. The international experts suggesting 40% haven't been right.
Well, look, they're still out there, Bryce. They're still, arguing their point. And, I've always said that the pessimists normally don't have the wealth outcomes as the optimists do. All right. And if you're a pessimist your entire life, you're going to get some calls right. But if you're an optimist, more often than not, in these environments, things surprise on the upside more so than the downside. So, and that's economic cycles and just the general amount of money that's flowing into the economy will eventually have, growth periods. So if you only need to look back through history around corrections that we do have, they're usually short-lived, and then the economy moves back into a growth phase. But we certainly could see it improve even better if we have that immigration story improved. And as I said to everyone, don't be fearful of your job. It actually creates more jobs. If we don't have people moving around in the economy, then simply, buying all of these things that they need, then the reality is we will have a more sluggish recovery, and that's not in anyone's best interest.
There you go, folks. Just thought that might be useful for you to see, some of the collective mindset that you may or may not be able to relate to back in early April when all this was starting to kick off. So, not kick off, it was probably at its peak anxiety period. So, Ben, we're going to go into a few questions that we've got through some of our listeners. So here's the first one from Declan.
G'day, Ivis, Ben and Bryce. Declan here. Just pushed through the 300 odd episodes, read both your books, trialled Location Score, joined the Facebook group Picker, and set up Money Sparts in the last 7.5 weeks. I can't believe how much free content you guys have pushed out. It's honestly been a sliding doors moment in my young investing career. My question for you is relatively simple. As a 23-year-old with a partner, reinvesting is essentially the only way we can get into an A or a high-level B grade property where we live. The missing piece from the last 300 episodes, in my point of view, has been a discussion around extending or refinancing interest-only periods. I was wondering if you gents could unpack a bit of a framework on the best way to prepare your financial situation so that a lender will consider extending your interest-only period. As having an extra 1, 2, or 3 years on IO can be a difference between letting out your first property at a cash flow loss compared to being neutrally geared, which is, in my opinion, the nirvana as a young bloke. P.S. Go the Swans.
Go the Swannies. Okay, so look, there's a couple of developing things happening around interest only at the moment. So the first thing that we did see, and again, kudos to our governments and our regulators and the RBA and APRA in the middle of the crisis, basically talked about their appetite to ensure that the vast majority of people were able to get credit, maintain credit, and keep their assets, because that's what would trigger, large distress selling. And I mean, sort of above 10% of the stock on the market at any one time will create pockets of distress selling, and that's not in anyone's best interest who have paid all that interest on a property and then they don't get any equity return on that. So what we have seen over the last couple of weeks is Westpac has announced that what is traditionally a credit critical play for interest only is no longer credit critical. So you can, through contacting them and explaining the situation, potentially get an interest only period extended if you are in that situation. And now what Declan is talking about here is what is the strategy when it comes to these types of things. And the view that I have around these types of strategies is it still comes back to cash flow and being in a position to be able to comfortably afford it. So my view is that if you've done 5 years with interest only with a particular lender, their appetite to switch you to another 5 years means, in theory, that if you had a 30-year loan term, then you only have 20 years to pay off the principal and interest portion. Now, if you go into a calculator and you put in what 20 years versus what 30 years looks like in terms of the amount of additional cash out of pocket that you're going to have to pay to cover that principal to get the amortized portion of that loan paid off in 20 years, you will understand that that has a significant impact on cash flows. So your choices are, and this is the great thing about an open market, is to potentially look to reset that mortgage, and you might reset it back to 30 years on principal and interest, or you can potentially go and reset that mortgage with another lender and choose to go interest only back on a 30-year loan term. Now, at some point, we want to stress this, right? Because we don't want this to be advice, Declan, that you just go out and just basically change everything to interest only and everyone stays on interest only forever. There is a time and a place for interest only, and there is a time and a place for building up money and offsets and potentially paying that debt down. We don't want to see anyone in their 50s and 60s who is carrying significant debt and their loan to value ratio is still in that sort of 80 plus range. That's not in anyone's household's best interest unless you're high risk, high reward. And even then we would be challenging you on whether that's a sensible strategy for you. We would probably talk you off that ledge because of the risks associated with that. But what we would like to see is people taking on productive debt to be able to get them to a position, and as Declan is learning from all of our free content out there, that interest only can potentially play a role in that. Now, if your lender is not forthcoming in that and the changes in the servicing calculators won't allow that, then the reality is that you do need to potentially look at your circumstances and shop around. Now, there is a senator out of Western Australia currently who is putting a body of work together around supporting borrowers that are coming out of interest-only periods. They've quoted a stat that there's around 700,000 people who have got interest-only loans that might be maturing over the next few years. I don't know where that data's come from, so I'd like to know where that is. But my point being is he is advocating to the banks, and I suspect we will start to see more stories coming out from the banks as they contact all of their customers about some choices that they have around going interest only for another 12 months if cash flow is a little bit of a challenge for you right now. But this is why, again, it's so fundamental that the property investment formula is 4 things. It's asset selection, borrowing power, defence and cash flow management. Right now, I said them in different orders because I wanted to land on cash flow management. But if you understand that cash flow management is absolutely critical and you do your planning, then you should be able to get to a situation where you can rinse and repeat if you are going to do a rent vesting strategy. That is an important piece in terms of that. And also, if you can, if you can come across lump sum sort of money, whether that be gifts or whatever, and we have historically low interest rates like we have at this time, we've talked also about when should you get into the property market and when should you not. Well, historically low interest rates and an improving economy potentially could lead to asset appreciation quicker than you can save. So I say to anyone out there, first home buyers or anyone who's looking to get into the market, if you can come into, some deposit money or some way in which you're getting in or releasing equity out there, that along with talking to an experienced professional who can outline the pros and cons of doing that, then it's worth making those investigations because, as we say, we think property prices in 2021 are going to be a little bit better than some of the forecasts are predicting at the moment.
Hey Ben, I think the important point of what you just said there is to just a couple of things. One, you're an investment savvy mortgage broker, so it kind of gives a sense to the listener on what input a good investment savvy mortgage broker can have. But it's also it shows that there's a bit to manage there. There's a few moving parts, and you've got to be able to front foot that to go, well, okay, if it is expiring, do I go to another lender? Do I request that extension? Do I request to reset that term out? So I think the important thing for me, because you've outlined it very, very well. So for Declan, it's really, for me, it's about the missing piece for you is to make sure that you do get someone on your team who understands investment, not just putting loan applications together, because that'll actually help you make sure you're in front of that, so that you can put your portfolio together and clearly move on to the next step. And hopefully for you, go and spend a bit more time at the Swans, Ben, at the SCG.
Now, Bryce, the great thing about working remotely like we are is you can have your computer on. So I just want to finish off with a nice little bit of teaser for Declan as well, and for the audience. So I did some numbers for a presentation that I'm delivering internally here. A $400,000 loan, Bryce, over a 20-year term to go. P&I repayments are $2,640 per month on a 5% interest rate, right? Now, interest only is $1,667 on a $400,000 loan, interest only. So that's a variance over 12 months of $11,676. So that's what Declan's referring to. And if I then also go to a $400,000 loan over a 30-year period, the repayments are $2,147, so $2,147 versus, again, interest only at 5% is $1,667. So that's also a cash buffer of $5,760. So you can get a sense of why massaging the money, and it's part of some of the free resources we've got where we talk about how can you invest without impacting the family budget. These are some of the ways in which you can do it in regards to how you find those surpluses. So Declan, as an astute listener of all of our stuff, has identified that. But for those new to the community, that's exactly what we were talking about. And I'll just round it out with 5 years. If you have to pay a $400,000 loan off in 5 years, Bryce, the principal and interest repayments are $7,548 per month versus if you're interest only, that's a $70,000 difference, because ultimately the amortization period is only 5 years. So you've got to pay 70 grand off in principal every year to be able to get on top of that loan. So that's where the art of productive debt and controlling an asset, but sensibly doing it, people, please. We're not advocating here that you just go out and get yourself into a very strong leverage position. There is a fine line, and there's also, we want to make sure you're a great money manager before you go and do that.
Very good, Declan. Hopefully that helps. Let us know. We'd love to hear, and hopefully that's helped everyone else who's been eavesdropping on the response to his question. But the next one's from Adam, who's come through with the following question.
Hey guys, how you going? My name's Adam and I love the podcast. I only found it about a week ago. By day 3, I'd already ordered and read the book. By day 5, I'd recommended to about a dozen people, and I'm just chewing through the backlog of the podcast. I'm currently on the Sunshine Coast and I'm looking to harvest equity in investment property I have in Adelaide to purchase a PPR while I'm working here, because the rent to lifestyle ratio isn't working in my favour. When I'm laying down the suburb demographics, you say aim for suburbs that are around about a 35 medium age with an increasing median income. How do you account for the fact that retirees are either there to downsize or buy through their assets, pay for the premium lifestyle, and so drive up the median age, drive up the prices, but drive down the income? Thanks again. Hope to hear an answer from you. Have a great one.
There you go, Ben. There's one from Adam, who's clearly doing it tough up there on the Sunshine Coast.
Yeah. Adam, it's a common story we get from lifestyle areas. And that's why it really is important to understand the demographics. So the Sunshine Coast, which is very similar to Byron, where we are seeing a younger demographic moving to those areas, and potentially what the council is focused in on is attracting business and investment into those areas to create the jobs, because you're right, the grey nomads and the retirees and all of that are moving up into those areas are usually low on income but asset rich, so they can potentially put pressure on prices, but it's not sustainable. What we want is not only a lifestyle test to be passed there, but also a story about how median incomes are going to grow in that location. So we saw a lot of people making money in short-term accommodation rentals in Byron and the hinterland there. Well, they're now exposed in regards to those, super yields that they were earning, because the reality is no one is able to travel to those tourism hotspots. So I think it's important for you to think about, Adam, what your short-term, medium and longer-term plans are. And if you're trying to put that PPR rock, the principal place of residence rock, in the jar, because you really do feel like this is the location that you want to live in, that's terrific. And that's a lifestyle decision. It will potentially be an asset that should appreciate if you're buying well, but over the long term. But just be mindful, it's not necessarily an area that we're saying is a layup if you're looking purely for growth. It does, as we say, attract excellent rental incomes, as you're saying, in terms of your ledger, where your yield is higher than what it cost you. And this highlights what Jeremy Shepherd was saying a few weeks back in terms of the areas where, from a cash flow point of view, it's actually better to buy than to rent in those particular locations, Bryce.
Yeah, it comes down to sustainability of growth versus some volatility, right? Because the Gold Coast has got the same. It's got, if you go to the Australian Tax Office, the average tax return for some of the incomes that are being lodged is very, very low, and yet you've got these amazing, very expensive properties that are on the water for the reasons that Adam's talking about before. People come up there, they pay cash. So it's about smoothing out the volatility. So what we want to do is, the way that we've talked about that is, if you understand what we were talking about before about borrowing power is really impacted by people's ability to service the loan. And if you can service the loan by demonstrating that you're in the demographic that's got a growing income, that gives you a better chance of being able to afford higher property, which then gives that affordability, that sustainability of the price growth. But yeah, you're right. The Sunshine Coast isn't necessarily a consistent growth market, but if you get the timing right, and then if you overlay some of the key items around lifestyle and status around what's on offer, is it close to the water, is it north facing, has it got all of the elements that are on offer in that particular temperate location, all those sorts of things. But it's a PPR. It's in a non-built-up area. It's for a lifestyle driver, so you can actually still pick good lifestyle drivers and have a bit of a sense around the properties that are in the area, because they've still got scarcity, they've still got higher owner-occupier appeal, and be very clear on what people are wanting to buy. But you make a good point. What we're trying to do is get that sustainability of the growth over time, rather than having a spike in growth that comes from being able to predict the people that are in peak life cycle, as well as peak earning power, with likelihood of getting an increase in income, because that's really the rising tide was lifting all ships over the last 30 years. But now, as we get to the fact that we've talked about this a number of times, where households are now got professional incomes, 2 incomes, interest rates are organically as low as they will ever go, Ben. Really, you've got to be smarter about what you're picking, and part of that comes from identifying the suburbs that have those growth in peak life cycle and the peak income.
And I think you could lump Cairns and Townsville and even Harvey Bay, and if you come down, even into the beach areas of Victoria and the like. If you're, and this is where the Sunshine Coast has a little bit more of an advantage, because it's driving distance or commute distance to a major employment centre, as is the Gold Coast. So that's where they have a little bit of an X factor. But those other markets, the Noosa markets, the Cairns markets, the Townsville markets, those types of areas are very seasonal in terms of their pricing, and they go through ebbs and flows. When the economy is absolutely thriving and executives are getting their bonuses and all those types of things, everyone's buying their holiday homes, and the tourism market's booming, and everyone's in those particular locations. So timing those markets, if you are interested in buying into those markets, as opposed to having dead money is rent money for some, that's what you've got to be considerate of, because we do know that at some point in the next 10 years, Cairns will absolutely have its time in the sun again. Tourism will return. There will be investment into that location. It's got all of those lifestyle drivers. Townsville will be similar, also supported by government infrastructure and spending, and sort of military services up there. So that said, they are not necessarily what we would call places that we would be bedding down, buying the vast majority of the investment grade properties that we're looking for. But if we're on the hunt for yield in those particular locations and we think we can get the timing right, they would certainly come on the radar for those types of cash cow cheapies that we sometimes have to buy for some clients.
I think the COVID-19 will change a little bit of. I think that Ben, if you're on the Sunshine Coast, as you know, Noosa is a wonderful, wonderful spot, but because it's on the northern end, it really increases that proximity for you to drive to a capital city job market there in Brisbane. Whereas, Caboolture being on the southern end of the Sunshine Coast, and again, if you go down towards the border on the Gold Coast with Tweed Heads and Coolangatta, they're just that little bit out of reach for that commutability because you're starting to really stretch. Yeah. But I think that COVID might actually stretch the upper northern boundary and the lower southern boundary on the Gold Coast, because all of a sudden people realise, well, maybe I can actually work from home 2 or 3 days a week. So therefore, I think that there will be some more appeal with owner occupiers and start to stretch closer to the border in the south and closer up to Noosa in the north, because they worked out that, I don't have to get on the highway and go to Brisbane every single day to get a capital city job, income.
It's a fair observation, yeah, for sure.
So there you go. Thanks for that, Adam. Really good question. Let us know if that's helped you as well. Okay, the next one, Ben, is Antares. I hope I don't get that spelling wrong, but let's have a listen to Antares' question.
Hey guys, just wondering your thoughts on our situation. We're looking at buying a waterfront property on the Central Coast under $2 million and potentially holding our existing home, which is almost paid off, and renting it and looking at selling it maybe next year. It's a lot to hold. It's probably a 40% of our income if we didn't have a renter. And also, would it be better maybe to buy and sell the same market? Just wanting your thoughts on that, guys. Thanks.
Antares, I enjoy questions like this because they do require some calculated assessment. Too often we see people selling properties to buy their next property, when in reality and in hindsight they look back and go, that was the worst thing I ever did. So if we can save just the odd people here and there from selling their property because they think they need to afford their next property, then I love this question. In terms of your own personal circumstances, we don't know enough about what you're talking about. Now, 40% of income is at the upper end, absolutely right. But I think what you're saying in terms of this sort of pandemic period, you're sort of saying, I think that our city property is going to get a better return and better capital growth next year if we sold it. But we love the idea of buying on the Central Coast right now because it's potentially a depressed market. Now, that is a good investment grade mind working there in terms of trying to get to a sense of what may be possible. So I do like the idea of entertaining that. It is all going to come down to cash flows. I would say to you in terms of what you could borrow, that you also may need to be looking at a buffer. So if I was doing the assessment for you, I'd probably give you a little bit more borrowings. So your cash flow would accommodate holding on to that asset, not just even into the middle of next year, but potentially into when we might be gearing up for a pretty solid property market into the back end of next year. So I think from that point of view, it does make sense and it's worth considering. But as we always say, you go and get some advice, get someone to do some modelling for you, get some research stats on where your current property is and demand supply ratios that are rolling out there, and also, where you're looking to buy. But I love these types of questions because if you can hold on to an asset, it's brilliant to be able to do that, especially if that asset's going to appreciate, and then you can cash out, you pay down that debt. It's money that you didn't anticipate you had. You've got an unencumbered owner-occupied $2 million dream home on the coast. Life's pretty good.
Yeah, you hit most of the points there, Ben, or if not all of them, in terms of it all comes down to buffers, right? And I think the Central Coast is on the point that I talked about before. It's going to be the beneficiary of the COVID effect too, Ben, because Central Coast is, if you're at the southern end, you can just get into Sydney, but if it's in the middle to the northern end, starting to stretch is where you get to a train station, all those sorts of things. So again, if people can get negotiate with their employers where they can spend a bit of time at home, I think that might make it a bit more popular. But it really comes down to just under 2 million. It's still on the high side for the Central Coast, and again, we don't exactly know where it is.
Well, it's
a waterfront property, so it's about better understanding the median price. But you can if you want to hold property in Toorak, Ben, it's probably going to go up in value, but you probably go broke holding it. Peppermint Grove, some parts of Bulimba, Ascot, Mossman Park. So it really just comes down to your circumstances and whether or not you can hold it without it. The fact that you've said it's 40% of your income, and it's probably starting to give you a few clues on the fact that you might be having one eye open at night. But clearly, scarcity, waterfront home. It's in a location that's got great weather. I think the COVID effect will make it a bit more popular, but it's certainly at a high price point where you wouldn't want to do that lightly. So, very good.
Can I make one final point on this one? Anyone who's looking at waterfront properties, just one important thing to consider: a higher water level over the course of the next 20 or 30 years, and how safe is the ground under which a storm surge through a large king tide and storm rolling in at the same time. Nothing better than having waterfront property in the water. So not all waterfront property these days is created equal. So there can be some incredible costs in terms of prevention and sort of, retaining walls and all of those types of things that you may need to build. So just a little trick for rookies who may be thinking, waterfront properties are the way to go. I'm being extremist there, but just...
I was going to say, didn't realise we needed the fun police alert there, Ben. It's like back in the 90s when the spruikers used to sell those blocks of land that used to be underwater for half the day and above water for the other half a day. So there you go. All right, well, there you go. You've heard all angles from that one. Hey, the last one we're going to have a crack at today, Ben, is from Johnny. And Johnny's written in to us and said, "Hi, Bryce and Ben. I'm writing to you guys as I have a question. I'm desperate for an answer, Ben. I'm in the cooling off period of my first home. The house is in Sturt in Adelaide. The property is 720 square metres. CoreLogic data suggests the property is worth $485,000. My offer of $490,000, Ben, has been accepted. With all this uncertainty around COVID-19, have I paid too much, or should I just go ahead with the sale? Currently tenanted at $360 a week until July. I am borrowing 90%. Is it just too risky as it's my first investment, or because I'm planning to hold for the long term, is it still a good idea? Hopefully someone can help me. Thank you in advance." Johnny, Ben, firsties, there's probably never been a better time for firsties for a long time, because COVID was interesting, wasn't it? Because first home buyers do not like a fast-paced market. They like to take their time. They usually got a bit of figuring out to do. So the fact that you're able to negotiate in a lower competition is balanced by the fact that you're in heightened anxiety. And for firsties, they're already anxious anyway. But my feedback here is the fact that it's 485 on a computer model shouldn't throw you. Because if you've offered 490 and that's what the market value is, if you had offered 485, there might have been someone who was prepared to offer 488 and you would have missed it. So use them as a guide, but don't necessarily get spooked by the fact that there's a difference. But I would say $5,000, Ben, is a lot of money for a lot of people. It's a holiday. There's a lot of things that you could do. You could put it in your offset account, which saves some interest. But in real estate, it's half an auction bid at times. So don't get overly concerned with the discrepancy around 5,000. But this was actually written into us, Ben, back in the end of March. So
23rd of March, right in the sweet spot of every day we're all listening to the Prime Minister come out and tell us what's next. Yeah. What's next? So obviously we're recording today on the 4th of June, and we're seeing, look, I mean, of course, we're never going to be able to, Johnny, give you the answer on that particular property for right now. It's an interesting question, as is always. But in terms of Sturt in Adelaide and what we have seen in the data for the May data, Adelaide's doing really well. Adelaide's holding up there. It's one of the top 5 capital cities where we haven't seen any correction. in terms of property prices falling. And that's what is Adelaide. It's just, I think I can. I keep going. I just keep going, right? So from that point of view, and Sturt is one of the better areas of Adelaide. Great size block of dirt, 720. I think generally speaking, if I'm holding for the long term, without knowing anything about the property or its location and it's not on a busy road or any of those types of things, more broadly speaking, I don't mind sub 500 purchase in any capital city that's got that sort of amount of dirt, if it's in a good little side street and near the amenities.
Yeah, Ben. I mean, don't make long-term decisions with short-term headlines is probably the point here. And given we got the benefit of hindsight with this question and a bit of time since then, I certainly hope that Johnny, it'd be great for you to let us know on socials or
cool off.
Ping us a note.
Did the fear get on top of you? Did the buyer's remorse get on top of you and you cooled off? That would be interesting to know.
Hey Ben, fun fact for those people who don't live in Adelaide, you can actually cool off without penalty in South Australia. So you don't actually need to go subject to finance or subject to building and pest, because everyone just gets it all done in the cooling off period, and they've got to issue what's called a Form 1, and your cooling off period doesn't start until you've had that issued. So you could end up having a few days to get all this stuff done. So unlike Victoria and other states where if you do cool off, there is actually a financial penalty from doing that, in South Australia, there is no penalty, Ben. But on the flip side, in Victoria, you get a pre-settlement inspection as standard, Ben. But in South Australia, you've got to put it in the contract or you just don't get one.
Yep. Good call, Bryce. Nice little tips there.
But Johnny, let us know how you go. I'd be super, super keen to see if you continued or if you didn't, based on all of the uncertainty at the time. And I know you were desperate for an answer, and unfortunately, Ben, we didn't get to it for 5 weeks, but hopefully that's benefited some folks who've been listening to that. So there you go, Ben. I want to say thanks to Adam, to Declan, to Antares, to Johnny, and also Ryan earlier for providing us with some commentary, some questions, some feedback, so that we could form some views, give some ideas around what we've done today. But mate, it's always fun for you and I when we get to do a bit of Q&A, isn't it?
I love it.
So there you go, folks. Hopefully that's been helpful. Let us know. We would love to hear from you. And of course, for those of you that want to go to thepropertycouch.com.au, there is a little widget on the side, Ben, which most of our contributors today have found, where they can leave a recording, have your question. We love to hear your voices. We love to put them on the podcast so we can hear them and get our community involved in our podcast, which has been great. But Ben, my life hack today is...
What I've noticed is, because I live in Torquay and I only commute up to the Big Smoke once a week now, so that you and I can get together and talk podcasts and all those sorts of things. I've been doing a bit more of the long haul driving. And so clearly leaving the driveway, you may know this, and a lot of our podcasters may know this, but it's just a reminder of the feature where you can go in and queue up, say, money news, for example, Ben. Do you know that I want to listen to that segment, I want to listen to that segment, I want to listen to that segment. So you're not driving along trying to scroll on your phone. You can actually go in and say play next, play later, play next. And then what you can do is actually go to the bottom of the actual active, I know you know that because you're nodding, but you go to the active window that you're listening to. And if you scroll down the page, you can see actually what's coming up next. And you can actually shuffle them around so that they actually play in the order. I'm, of course, talking about through the Apple iTunes app, Ben. So clearly I can't talk for Spotify and for wherever other people are listening outside of that. But just a reminder, Ben, that for us to make sure that we're listening to our favourite podcasts, we can queue them up, we can control the order, and we control the queue to make sure that we don't have to distract ourselves from the main game, which is to stay safe on the roads or doing what we're doing. So use that feature. So some people might know that, Ben, some people might not. But it's a good reminder on how we can make sure that we stay safe.
Very good reminder, Bryce. Also staying safe, but also getting organised, because our time is finite. Only listening to the content that we want to listen to is also important there, because you can be on podcasts that have breakout sessions and you're just like, wait a minute, I just want to get to the gold. So that's also a good little lesson there. So well done. Thank you for that.
Hey, what's making property news?
What's making property news? Well, obviously we had the announcement early this week from the Reserve Board, cash rates on hold. You can get my rant in regards to that early this week. So there's not much to talk about the data there, but I didn't circle back for the auction clearance rates price. So on the weekend, the preliminary auction clearance rates as reported by CoreLogic had Melbourne's clearance rate at 71.9 of the 192 auctions reported. Sydney had a preliminary clearance rate of 68.1 of the 320 auctions reported. So they're good numbers. I mean, Domain had it at 65 of 110 reported, and they had 62 for Sydney for them. Realestate.com.au had 75 of the 130 they had reported, and also 72% clearance rate for the 210 they had reported. So, that'll wash down into the late 60s. But if we put our minds back to what was happening in May last year, our clearance rates were only in the 50s. Now, we do know that there has been an increase in activity. So the auction clearance rates are now that we've got mobility back, actually have some reading on the market. And I suspect we'll see more and more properties come to market via auction in the coming weeks and months as we see the property market, #AusPropertyAlive, continuing to improve, Bryce.
Well said, Ben. I was going to say that Oz as in OZ, Ben, not AUS, but Oz Property Alive. That was going very well over the weekend, seeing lots of activity out there. So if anyone's listening to this, go to your favourite social handle. I know it was on Facebook and Insta. I didn't check any of the others, Ben. You might know that. But go and check it out and just go and watch some activity. It's great. And for all those real estate professionals or buyers who are in the marketplace, it's another shout out to you that if you're active this weekend, let us know. Show some photos, give us some video footage. I know that Andrew Date, who's one of my mates, he did a little drive-by, Ben, and the lineup, and he put it on Oz Property Live. It went around the corner, which was super interesting. The line was huge and went around the corner. So clearly there's more than a bit of passing interest on that property.
And next week, Bryce, we'll be talking about the incentive, the stimulation program that the Federal Liberal Party are announcing in more detail then. So we'll take a deep dive into that next week.
Sounds good. All right, folks. Hopefully that's been of value to you. Hopefully that's been helpful. And we've certainly enjoyed being able to answer your queries, and we want to answer many, many more like it. So send them, folks. But Ben, until next week. Or hang on. Pendles.
No, I'm not Pendles. I'll never be Pendles. Don't ever put me in the same class as Scott Pendlebury. That's embarrassing. Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it.
Well said. Very humble. See you next week, folks.
Hey there, folks. Bryce Holdaway here. Before you go, if you're new to our community and only listened to maybe a handful of episodes, I thoroughly recommend that you go all the way back to episode number 1, where we unpack all of the foundations when it comes to property investing. Now, for those of you that might be a little bit time poor, I've got good news for you. We have a binge guide that you can download straight away, which summarizes the first 20 episodes where Ben and I unpack the foundational pillars of the A, B, C, D, and so much more. And you can get that straight away. If you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20, you can download it and consume it whenever you want. It's completely free and available now. And for those of you, just a quick reminder that nothing we've spoken about today constitutes financial advice. We recommend that you reach out to your licensed professional advisor so that you can look at your unique circumstances before acting on any information. Now don't forget, go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20 and get your binge guide today.